Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about change, growth through change, and with me is an expert that I've heard speak before. Nick Tasler is here to talk to us all about change. And so welcome, Nick. Appreciate having you here today.
Thank you, Kent. I'm super excited to be here today.
Thanks. Well, for the record, I think I first heard you speak when I was working for Buffalo Wild Wings, and it probably would have been 2016 or 2017, and impressed me at the time. But we'll get into some of what impressed me about what you had to say. And I think at the time you had just written Domino, or sometime prior to that. And
yeah, no, exactly. Yes, Domino's 2015. I was trying to think actually when Buffalo Wild Wings was, but somewhere in that neighborhood.
My 10 years, 16 to 7, I think 15 to 17. So it might have been somewhere in there. But before we get too much into the topic, I would love for people just to learn a little bit more about you and how you worked your way to graciously being on the other side of this interview today.
Well, I got lucky being on the other side of this interview today is, that's one thing, but I guess you could say I worked my way to it. So sure. I'm an organizational psychologist by training. And that's kind of what I've done, really, quite honestly, ever since my undergraduate degree was in psychology and management. Okay. And so I've been playing in these spaces ever since I was 18, I guess. So I did a little bit of management consulting, and then I worked for a small boutique firm that specialized in emotional intelligence training for the corporate world out in San Diego. And then that kind of led into my first book, which so at the time I was doing research and development. I was the head of research and development for this company that was specialized in emotional intelligence, but we were kind of trying to branch out a little bit into decision making. So I did some research on that, wrote some papers and some articles, and GE got a hold of it and asked me to come talk to their high potential leader program in Connecticut, and then they liked it. So then I went to Australia and to London, and all those things together kind of led to my first book. And that was now we're 5 books later. And 17 years later, and here we are. So I've been out on my own since 2009.
Awesome. Does writing get any easier?
It does. Okay. It does. I think I hesitated because it gets easier, but the personal bar gets higher.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, got it.
So I feel like I'm a much better writer now than I was then. Okay. But I have higher expectations. I know what good writing is better now than I did before.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. As someone who's maybe barely dabbling with the thought of writing, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but good to know.
No, well, so think about it this way. My first book was published when I had not written anything. So it was it was okay then. I just have a different expectation for myself now, I guess. But I will say also, I think a little bit, and maybe you can embrace this, Kent, as you're just starting to write, is the one advantage to not having done it for a long time is also you don't self-edit as much, and that it can be counterproductive as you get into raising that bar. Sometimes you overthink it the more you get into it. When I was first starting to write, you're just kind of letting the ideas flow, and it can be liberating, and the writing can be better in some ways. So
nice. Yeah, I may have been described as an overthinker once or twice in my life, but that's a story for another time. Now, I've been misquoting you for years, and I'm so glad to be talking to you today. And just for the listener, we're meeting probably for the first time today, because even if we might have met when you spoke for 5 seconds, and that's 1,000, 10,000 people ago, I'm sure. But something you said when you spoke at Buffalo Wild Wings has stuck with me. And like I said, I'm hoping I haven't completely butchered it. I think it's good, and you've been getting the credit either way. But when I've been talking to leaders about change, or even just getting started on an initiative, what I've said to them for for years now has been, just get started. It's hardly the first decision that matters. It's actually your second decision or third decision, correcting everything you've gotten wrong or you've learned along the way from just getting started. And that resonated with me from my entire background, even up to that point, which is, I don't necessarily consider things done and dusted ever, which may be a problem that I need to dig into as well, which is keep making it better, keep learning, keep working on it. But let me get back to that quote, which is, how off have I been?
And not very off. I would say you're like maybe slightly you're near the first bullseye ring. That was as I'll put it. But that's essentially, but you got the gist of it, right? The gist of it is it's the second decision that counts. And and I actually say that in a few different ways. So, I say it's not the purpose is not to make the best decision. It's the purpose is to get you to the next decision. Another way is don't spend so much time trying to make the right decision. Focus on making the decision right after you make it, right? And it kind of runs counter to how we're normally taught. And I'm not suggesting that we need to be cavalier and like impulsive when we're all out shooting from the hip, right? There can cause some collateral damage there. But the fact of the matter is, it's mostly, Kent, and I know this is the way that you use it, it's like a recognition that we will not ever have all the facts.
Right.
So let's get that idea off the table. I don't care how good your spreadsheet is. I don't care how good your AI algorithms are. You will not have all the information you need to make the decision. And yet, particularly once you're no longer an individual contributor and you're in a leadership role, you have to make a decision anyway. And that's kind of the key, right? I mean, that's, I'm sure, maybe the context you were using it in.
I find myself with different folks I've been coaching, currently coaching, coached in the past. Some folks have this, I need to be super sure. I need to feel like I've got it 100% before I either speak up or begin to move. And that's sort of where I've brought this in is my guest tells me, with the years of experience you have, there's a point of diminishing returns where you could probably get moving sooner, and adjust as you go, right? And that's sort of been the context that I've now I can say I've been close enough in quoting you.
Keep going down that path. You're quoting me conceptually, and that's all I care about.
The good news is, as I usually follow that up with, I might have gotten that wrong. Buy the book Domino.
There you go.
You'll get it there.
Well, if I could, another point that I think about on this topic is it's also just like, I think it helps us to be more experimental, right? And when we know that this is just the first in a series of decisions that we're going to make, we don't try and do too much with that first decision. So it's kind of like, it's like a subconscious way of recognizing this is just a hypothesis that we're testing. So let's not go all in yet, because we don't know if it's right. So what's the little, the tiny little chunk of this that we can bite off and see if we like it, before we commit too many resources, too much time to this, whatever it is.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I who knows if I'll end up saying this in every single podcast episode, but similar in the coaching world, I continue to encourage people, just experiment, try it one time, right? You don't think of the next thing you do as the thing you're going to do forever. Try it out, get feedback, adjust.
Yeah.
But before I get too far down that road, another quick thing that kind of brought you to mind as I was getting started even with the idea of having a podcast is I had just had a client. She was introducing me to her CEO and chief of staff, and we were pitching a custom leadership development program. And she had said, the nice thing about Kent is he brings the hammer and the hug. And I swear, it's just perhaps we were destined for this phone call, at least, or this podcast, at least today, because I remember reading right along there this quote you had from your new book. And I Now, I'm immediately going to butcher it, so I'm going to put it on you because I think you know where I'm going with it. Because I really like what you had to say, and it's all about change management, I think.
Yeah, it's about growing in response to change, and we can dig deeper into why I bristle a little bit at change management, but we'll come
Please.
back
All
to
right.
that.
So, but what is that? What is that quote? Because I loved it. It was pushes and shoves.
Well, it could have been this one.
It's right there. Love it. Okay.
Great leaders of change push you with one arm and love you with the other arm, right? And so I actually stole that from the retiring COO of Walmart US. So I was speaking to them. They're regional store managers. Once a year, they get all 2,000 or so of them together, and I was invited to speak to that group. And right before I went on stage, they had the outgoing COO who had spent his whole career at Walmart. Like, it's a great story, really. He started out as a teenage cart corraller in Dallas, working alongside his mom, who was a cashier at the same Walmart. And now, 35 years later, he's in charge of 1.2 million employees. And anyway, and I was so struck by, so it's kind of like, it was sort of this like, let's send him off with this great farewell, but also let's glean the last bits of insight we can before he rides off into the sunset. And he said something, and I don't know if I'm getting it exactly right. I did actually write it down though, so I think I'm right. He said, one of the most useful things he learned as a leader is actually something he learned from his high school basketball coach, which is that great leaders push you with one arm and love you with the other. And I just thought it's kind of like something, right, that we all sort of intuitively know, but I never heard it put quite in those terms. And I thought, this is like, that captures it right there. And then I could immediately, in my head, I'm thinking of all this research on not just management, but on parenting, on teaching. And I think of this chart, right? You imagine, I know you appreciate a good 4-box diagram,
like any good consultant.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So this one is, you've got standards on the y-axis, and you've got support on the x-axis.
Yep.
All right. And so where you want to be is right here, high standards and high support. And it's such a good way of, because when I think about like my own leadership style, I tend to be high on support, right? That's probably why I'm in like the people side of business. But I struggle with like the confrontational, holding people's feet to the fire part of it. And so I'm high support, low standards, it's like instinctively.
Yeah.
But I know that's a failing, and I've suffered the consequences of that. And I think if we're honest, like the people who I've led at various times have also suffered like I'm not helping them reach their full potential.
Right. Are you truly high support if you're not holding to high standards, right?
That's a great way to look at it. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So that connects with, when I've talked with leaders about giving feedback to folks, right? I think there's such a connection here to, and I think most leaders don't wake up trying to make people's lives worse. I think most leaders wake up with a goal to be neutral to positive, neutral at the worst, right? And when I talk to leaders about giving folks feedback, for example, the best feedback I've ever gotten has been from people who I knew cared.
Yeah.
And the more I knew they cared, the less they even had to have that as a preamble to giving me the feedback, right? And those where maybe there was more of a question, the feedback always went down better with, I've got some feedback. The reason I'm giving it to you is because I care, yada, yada, and gosh, that, now they care, and that's why they're giving you the feedback, right?
I think you hit on something important there, Kent, which is in the best scenario, the best leaders don't even need to tell you that. right? You already know that they care about you. So they don't even have to give you the preamble of
Right.
this is why.
Right.
However, I recommend you you do give a little bit of that preamble because people might not know it like you think they do, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I would fully agree that it's best when you don't have to say it, but just in case, maybe say it.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I don't want to say where I was working, but we were looking at how leaders did or didn't feel supported by their leaders, that their careers were cared about. And it was so, even when we're talking like high potential leaders here,
Yeah.
what's so interesting that we sort of found was the farther we got from um, a talent review, for example, where there
Mhm.
were some specific actions we were asking leaders to take to go give this person the feedback that we think the world of them and see a bright future. And here's how we're going to invest in you. And the farther we got from that date, the memory or I don't know, the half life or however you want to
Yeah.
describe that
Yeah.
of that interaction just kind of dropped precipitously. So there's also this sort of like people need to hear that you think well of them and see a bright future maybe more often um,
Imagine.
than we think. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a really, and you actually were like studying this, like you kind of, you,
I mean, to call it studying is loose, but we
all
were
right. So it's
looking at it within a business
anecdotally.
unit. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think it's so true. And actually, I'm actually working on an article now, and I've been researching the notion of just there was a research article. It's been probably 20 years ago now, but it still sort of holds up, and it's just titled "Bad is Stronger Than Good." Okay, and it goes through and it breaks down, I mean, literally like everything you could possibly think of, from how we think about ourselves to how we rate other people to how we rate relationships, how we treat just everything you can think of. Our brains are wired to pay 3 to 5 times more attention to the negative aspect than
Right.
the positive aspect. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, I mean, they turned over every rock in psychology for like the last
Mm,
100 years, and it's just true across the board. And so, what made me think of that now is like, so you hear it once, right? I
mhm.
hear Kent, my boss, tell me he appreciates me.
Yep.
Okay. Um, and that might counteract what I didn't know he thought about me before that.
Hmm.
But then in the ensuing months, every sideways glance you give me, I'm going to latch on to that. My brain is immediately going to remember that. And it's going to so overpower and wash out
Right.
that positive interaction that we had that I'm going to completely forget it.
Mm, that is a really good point. Because what we were looking at was we were getting the feedback from people we knew to be high potential. Me and the HR team, we were getting the feedback of, does this group even see a future for me? And we were just
Yeah.
shocked because we were like, you're at the I mean, internally we were like, this person's at the top of the list. How do they not know that, right? And
Right.
and I think it's exactly to your point is, people can feel like I'm only as good as the last negative feedback I got, or whatever.
Yeah.
This like
Totally.
it's very similar to, you're what is it? You're 10 times more like if you're unhappy with service, you're likely to tell 10
Yeah. The
people. If you're
customer service thing. Right.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm having a ton of fun here. Let me just reel us back to your current book for a minute and what led you down this path for this book.
Yeah. So, as we already talked about, my first books were on decision making and kind of these various attributes of it and how it works for us personally, and then how we apply it as a leader and what it means for us, etc. And um, I would say probably about the time that you and I first connected with Buffalo Wild Wings, right about then, it was interesting as I'm talking about, and that's actually what led to the book Domino, which I think was
Mhm.
the sort of the impetus for Buffalo Wild Wings. Um, was that as I'm talking about decision making, everyone who's hiring me and wants me to come and talk to their leaders, talk to their teams about this, the conversation would start out something like this. Well, we're going through a lot of change right now, and ... And so it's sort of like making decisions and being more decisive was the solution, but the problem was we're having a hard time with these changes, like getting people on board, and what would you call change management, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that was essentially the issue, and so I kind of started turning my attention a little bit more to, okay, so what does this look like in a change context? And it was interesting for me also because, personally, so I'm now 46 years old, and I've changed homes 34 times
Oh,
in
wow.
my lifetime. Yeah. And so starting from when I was a baby, up and through my adulthood. So the cliche for me that change is the only constant has been 100% true.
Okay.
In my life. So I guess it sort of makes sense that this is where I've ended up, right? Um,
Well, it
and
brings two questions, though, if I could interrupt you. One is, uh,
what the hell is wrong with your parents?
well. I was going to assume there's a military background, and then my other
As
question
everyone
was,
does.
your area code on your phone tells me we have a shared Minnesota background at some point
Yeah.
in your.
Mm-hmm.
So what led to all that, and when were you in Minnesota? Just out of personal curiosity, I guess.
So there was zero military.
Okay.
But that's what everyone assumes because who else does
Moves
this,
that much,
right?
yeah.
It was just probably the explanation for it can be summed up by the title of my first book, which was called The Impulse Factor. And it's all about why people are impulsive.
Okay.
So again, this is semi-autobiographical, right? But there was that part of it, and why I have a 612 area code. I grew up in Iowa. I've lived in Chicago, Phoenix, San Diego, which is where I met my wife, who's from Minnesota, which
Okay.
is really how I ended up with a 612 area code.
There
But
we
I
go.
currently live in Puerto Rico, which I've been here
Oh,
for 9
as
years.
evidenced by the surfboard I saw in the background earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So anyway, so the 612 area code, I first had a Chicago area code, then a San Diego area code, and then 612
Mhm.
for my time in Minneapolis, and I've just never changed it. Hopefully never will. But
Love it. So I threw you off track because you were talking about your how many times you had moved. I think we were getting.
yeah. So what led to the book, right?
Yeah.
Like what led to the most recent book. And so anyway, my thinking had started shifting over to change, and it was really my last book prior to the one that just came out in January was 2017.
Mhm.
And that's because after I wrote that book, which was all about dealing with change. So Domino is this book about how do you lead others to change? And the question I was getting then is like, do you have something? So I'm the leader. Do you have something for my team? Right. Because so you're helping me lead change, but what about the people that the change is happening to? Which led into that book. But after I got done writing that one, and it was called Ricochet, What to Do When Change Happens to You,
Mhm.
for the first time in my 10 years of writing, I kind of said everything that I thought I wanted to say. And so I took like a 7-year hiatus. And it was really the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic that kind of sparked the next idea, which was, so if you look at the last book, Ricochet was think of it as like being about resilience, about like
Mhm.
how do you deal with this change that's happening to you that you maybe didn't want, that you didn't expect, and so I like dug into resilience research, and it was really about more or less surviving and adapting to change, which is
Mhm.
important. But in the pandemic, I kind of had this realization that I've been selling change short. That if we're only talking about how do you survive change, how do you adapt to change,
Mhm.
we're really missing the boat. And I started researching that. And it's fascinating the way our brains operate on change. The big epiphany for me was that if you think about it, and Kent, I'm going to put you on the spot
All
here. You
right.
don't have to say it, but
Fair enough.
if you think about every great achievement in your life, personally or professionally, dating
Right.
back to, high school achievements in sports or music or debate team or whatever, all the way up to your career achievements,
Mhm.
I can almost guarantee that if we were able to trace the timeline of that achievement, we would find that the seeds of that great achievement were planted during a season of change and disruption and uncertainty that you were probably really uncomfortable with, weren't happy, didn't like,
Mhm.
but that's exactly what altered your routine, which grew your skills, which led to maybe this different outlook on your life, your work, etc., that led to this eventual great achievement. And it's so universal
Yeah.
that we have to say, you know what, maybe this happened not in spite of the change, but because of it.
Huh.
And that's what your Year of Wonders is all about.
I love that. So I'll divulge then. So like two things came into my head around my own
Mm-hmm.
kind of background and experience. The most recent is uh, setting up my own practice, so to speak, as
Mm-hmm.
an independent consultant, and I've never been happier and healthier. And was that extremely scary, challenging, to get started? Yeah, yes, and it was a part of leaving one thing behind and stepping into the new thing and all the dynamics of both sides of that
Mm-hmm.
equation, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that popped into my head is, and I will use the term correctly because people would say, regardless of your age, you are an Eagle Scout. And so, you, so I earned my Eagle Scout probably in high school with
Uh-huh.
so much going on, right?
Yeah.
I was in theater, scouts, there was the Order of the Arrow, this kind of separate organization. You're looking at starting to think and look at colleges, and somehow
Yeah.
in the midst of all of this, kind of seeing this kind of the trajectory to get to Eagle, happening in the midst of all that, right?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like so I was not an Eagle Scout. I retired from the Boy Scouts after my Grand Prix silver medal,
Nice.
Pinewood Derby, right?
Love it.
And but anyway, but I think that like one of my understanding of it is like kind of on the road to becoming an Eagle Scout. It's like this is sort of baked in that you're going to be challenged,
Oh yeah.
and like that's how you get there, right? And like
Yep.
so, it's like we've known this as human beings. The creators of the Boy Scouts, this is not new to them.
Yeah.
It's like we're going to throw you out on your own. You're going to have to figure some stuff out, and by
Yep.
the way, you're going to learn stuff about yourself you never would have discovered otherwise, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
and so I think for many of us, it's not necessarily something that we choose. It's thrust upon us. Like you chose Boy Scouts, you chose to become, to do the work necessary to become an Eagle Scout. But in a lot of cases, it happens with a job that we didn't like or that we loved and got laid off from, or
Right.
these moments, they are what shape us. And what we're really sort of drove this home for me is as I'm sitting there in the pandemic, and for me, 90% of my revenue comes from speaking to large audiences that were no longer convening for
Mm,
about 2 years,
right.
right? So for people like me, like the pandemic was an existential threat, even if it wasn't a physical threat.
Mm-hmm.
It was, and so it makes you reflect, right?
Mm,
It makes you think. And in the midst of all of this, I stumbled onto this story about Isaac Newton, and how the idea for the theory of gravity, his famous falling apple moment, happened during the Great Plague of 1665,
ah.
when he is sent home from Cambridge, and he's like sitting there in his backyard, pondering the messed up state of things and this huge disruption to his world and this potentially fatal threat to his future.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in the midst of all this when he, either, depending on what story you want to believe, the apocryphal one where the apple hit him on the head, or
Yeah.
just the one where he noticed it, right? But the thing that's interesting about it is he was back home when this happened, meaning he's sitting in his own backyard, surrounded by an apple orchard. Point is, he'd seen apples falling from trees his
Yeah.
entire life. But it wasn't until this like confusing, messed up period that he actually noticed something unique and interesting about that apple falling from a tree, right? And that's what I think change does for us. Is it doesn't necessarily like kick us out of the nest always. Sometimes it does, but it gives us a new lens to see things that we had always been seeing, that have been right in front of our noses for days, months, years potentially, but we just see it from a new light that we had never noticed before. That's where we get these insights. And there's actually some pretty interesting neurological research to explain why that happens.
That's amazing. And I bet if everybody listening just thinks of what are some of the epiphanies you might have had during the pandemic, I bet everybody can resonate with that. So two quick things, because we're going to downshift into the final quick section of the podcast, but a comment and a question. So the comment is, well, don't beat yourself up for 7 years between books because you're doing better than George R.R. Martin. So congratulations.
That's right.
And
Thank you.
The
I'm in good company.
The question is, I want to just call back to, I said change management earlier, and you said I bristle at change management. So let's just go there for a second.
All right. So I don't know if we have time to go into all of this, but let me try and not totally geek out for people that aren't that deep into the change management world. But I sometimes refer to myself as a self-hating change management expert because I think the very notion of change management makes us treat change like project management, like it's this project that can be managed with a clear starting point A, getting to a clear end point B, and that's just not how change works in the modern world of business and organizations. And I know. I don't want to be too judgmental or critical of it because I know where it came from. I started my career at Accenture working on change projects, but what was called change projects was Exxon and Mobil have merged. They're both running different versions of SAP, and we need to get them on the same. So it really was a technology project at its core, right? And so you needed this gigantic Gantt chart and all the deliverables and milestones and whatever. So I like that's still important. We still need that, but I think it needs to stay in the realm of project management. And we need to understand when we're talking about managing change, it's a different animal now. We need to get used to the fact that it's not a project. It is a state of being. It is a reality that's not going away. Whatever it's not the precursor
clean.
Yeah, whatever the change, like capital C change that's happening right now, that's the impetus for this, is just going to be replaced by another thing tomorrow and another the next day. So it's not just AI, it's not just this new leader, it is the state of the world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so let's bring this into a landing. I asked you today to be prepared to give our listeners a few things that they could take some action on right away. So what you got?
Well, I want to go back to something that we said earlier, because I know there's a lot of leaders listening. So I think the key thing here to take away is you're a leader. If you're wanting to create this kind of year of wonders moment within your team where you're able to take this period of change and uncertainty, and with tariff turmoil, we're all dealing with massive uncertainty right now. The best thing you can do is keep that push and love mantra at the forefront of your mind. If you really want your team to not just survive this period, but to actually see what they can do for themselves, for you, for your company, it starts with push and love. Okay, so that would be one thing. The other thing is, in a very self-serving way, is check out the book, right? Your Year of Wonders. It's on Amazon. It's on Audible. You can You can digest it in whatever way you prefer.
Did,
But
did
it's
you go
called.
all in and do the audiobook yourself?
I did. I
All
did.
right.
I mean, look,
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Kent, with this voice, how could I not? Right.
Love it.
So yeah, that's the book. Go check it out wherever books are sold.
Love it. I see the apple. Now I get it.
Now you get it. Now you understand the falling apple.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And anything else?
That's it. Check me out on LinkedIn. And we'll continue the dialogue there.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure that we include links to your website, book, LinkedIn, all of that in the show notes. So thank you, Nick. I really appreciate you being here today. I know we kind of had a surprisingly wide-ranging conversation, which was super fun. We could continue it for an hour if we had the time on our schedules, I'm sure. But I really appreciate you coming on today and being a part of the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kent. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you.